My mom and I stopped talking after a huge fight, but the truth we discovered about each other changed everything. Hey Reddit, I'm Emily, 30, and my relationship with my mom, Diane, 57, has always been complicated. Growing up, we were close. She was my best friend, my confidant, and the person I went to for everything. But as I got older, things changed. We drifted apart, had explosive fights, and eventually stopped talking altogether. I thought I knew everything about my mom, but when we finally reconnected, I discovered secrets that completely changed the way I saw her. This is the story of how I learned to forgive my mom, understand her past, and rebuild our broken relationship. Growing up, my mom was everything to me. It was just the two of us for as long as I could remember. My dad left when I was a toddler, and I barely knew him. Mom never talked much about him, and as a kid, I just accepted that it was us against the world. My mom was a force of nature, a single parent who worked long hours as a nurse, yet still found time to be my biggest cheerleader. She juggled everything: bills, school meetings, and the endless challenges of raising a child on her own with a strength that I admired. Our small apartment was a cozy, cluttered sanctuary. Mom filled every corner with little mementos of our life together: shells we'd collected on beach trips, handmade crafts from my school days, and old photo albums that captured every moment of my childhood. I'd flip through those albums often, marveling at the snapshots of our adventures, picnics in the park, days at the zoo, and the countless times we'd spent baking cookies or making holiday decorations. Mom made sure my childhood was filled with joy, even when money was tight and life was hard. Mom was always there for me, showing up to every school event, cheering me on at soccer games, and staying up late to help me with homework. She was the kind of mom who went above and beyond, volunteering as the class mom even though she worked 12-hour shifts at the hospital. I admired her work ethic and her relentless determination to provide for us. She'd make me pancakes shaped like animals on Saturday mornings, and we'd watch movies together on the couch until I fell asleep in her lap. I adored her, and I felt safe knowing that no matter what, my mom was in my corner. But as I got older, things began to change. When I hit my teenage years, our relationship became strained. I was stubborn, rebellious, and fiercely independent, traits I now realize I got from her. Mom, on the other hand, was overprotective and strict, terrified that something bad would happen to me. She'd set curfews, constantly check in on where I was, and question every decision I made. It felt suffocating, like I couldn't breathe without her watching over my shoulder. I remember one summer when I was 15. I had started hanging out with a new group of friends, kids who were a little wilder and less concerned with rules than my previous crowd. We'd stay out late, loitering at the park or grabbing fast food at midnight. Mom hated it. She'd call me nonstop, demanding to know where I was and who I was with. One night, I got home past my curfew, and she was waiting for me in the living room, her face tight with anger and worry. "Emily, where have you been?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "I've been calling you for hours." "I was just hanging out," I snapped, throwing my bag onto the couch. "Why are you always on my case? I'm not a kid anymore." Mom's expression shifted from anger to hurt. "Because I'm your mother. I have a right to know where you are. You think I don't worry about you? You think I don't stay up every night, praying you're safe?" I could see the tears welling up in her eyes, but I was too wrapped up in my own frustration to care. "I just want to live my life, Mom. You can't control everything." We kept arguing, our voices getting louder and louder until I finally stormed off to my room, slamming the door behind me. I could hear Mom crying in the living room, but I was too angry to care. I hated how she made me feel guilty for wanting to live my life, and she hated how I was pulling away. It was a cycle we couldn't seem to break. High school was a constant battle of wills between us. Mom wanted me to be the perfect daughter, the straight-A student, the polite young woman who stayed out of trouble, but I was determined to carve out my own path. I started hanging out with kids she didn't approve of, skipping classes, and making choices that I knew would drive her crazy. It wasn't that I wanted to hurt her, I just needed to feel like I had some control over my own life. Things got even worse after I graduated high school. I decided to move out and go to college in another city, partly because I wanted to get away from the constant tension at home. Mom tried to be supportive, but I could tell she was hurt. She didn't understand why I was so eager to leave, and I didn't know how to explain that I needed space to figure out who I was outside of our relationship. In college, I embraced my newfound freedom. I made friends, joined clubs, and started dating a whole world that felt thrilling and new. But the more I tried to build my own life, the more disconnected I felt from Mom. Our phone calls became less frequent, and when we did talk, it was strained and awkward. I knew she missed me, but every conversation felt like walking on eggshells, avoiding any topic that might lead to another fight. During my sophomore year, Mom came to visit for Parents' Weekend. I was excited to show her my new world, to let her see the life I was building. But the visit was a disaster. She kept commenting on everything: my messy apartment, my dyed hair, the posters on my wall that she found inappropriate. Every interaction felt like a critique, and I felt like I was 16 all over again, fighting for her approval and never quite getting it. On the last day of her visit, we had another argument. It started with something small, Mom making a comment about my outfit, but quickly escalated into a full-blown fight about my choices, my independence, and how she felt I was pushing her away. "You're just going to leave again," she said, her voice heavy with disappointment. "You always find a reason to run away." I snapped back, tired of the guilt trips. "I'm not running away, Mom. I'm just trying to live my life. You can't keep controlling everything I do." Mom's face turned red, and before I knew it, we were screaming at each other. She accused me of being ungrateful, of not caring about her feelings, and I fired back that she was overbearing and impossible to please. It was the worst fight we'd ever had, and when it was over, I grabbed my things and left without saying goodbye. That was the last time we spoke for nearly a year. After that fight, I threw myself into my new job and my new life, trying to forget about the mess I'd left behind. I told myself I didn't need my mom's approval, that I was fine on my own. But deep down, I missed her. I missed the way things used to be, before the fights and the distance. I'd catch myself looking at old photos of us and feel a pang of regret, but I was too stubborn to reach out. Months passed, and the silence between us grew heavier. Holidays came and went without a word, and I couldn't help but feel a void where my family should have been. I'd hear from mutual friends that Mom was doing okay, still working long hours at the hospital, and occasionally I'd get updates through Facebook posts, pictures of her with coworkers or friends, smiling, but always with a hint of sadness in her eyes. I could tell she missed me too, but neither of us was willing to make the first move. I spent that year trying to convince myself I didn't care, but it was a lie. I missed our talks, our movie nights, and even the little things like the way she'd call just to ask if I was eating enough. But every time I thought about reaching out, I'd remember the last fight, the way her words had cut through me, and I'd shut down again. It was easier to pretend I was fine than to confront the pain of our broken relationship. Then one day, everything changed. I was at work, buried in a project, when my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was short, just a few words, but it made my heart drop. "Emily, it's Mom. I'm sorry for everything. Please call me." I stared at the message, my mind racing. I didn't know what to think. Was she sick? Was something wrong? My first instinct was to ignore it, but something told me that this wasn't just another attempt to reel me back in. I hesitated for a long moment before finally calling her back. Mom picked up on the first ring, her voice shaky and filled with relief. "Emily, thank you for calling. I didn't know if you'd respond." I could hear the anxiety in her voice, and it tugged at something deep inside me. I didn't know what to say, so I just listened as she told me why she'd reached out. Mom explained that she'd been going through some things, and that she needed to talk to me, really talk, without the fights, without the blame. There was something she needed to tell me, something she'd been holding on to for years. I agreed to meet her, not knowing what to expect. We decided to meet at a quiet cafe halfway between my place and hers. When I saw her for the first time in almost a year, my heart ached. She looked tired, older than I remembered, like the weight of the past year had taken its toll on her. But there was also a vulnerability in her eyes that I hadn't seen before, like she was finally ready to let down her walls. We sat down, awkwardly making small talk at first. The silence between us was thick, filled with unspoken apologies and the ghosts of every argument we'd ever had. Finally, Mom took a deep breath and began to talk. Emily, there's something I've never told you about your father, she said, her voice trembling. I looked at her, confused. My father had left when I was young, and we rarely talked about him. He was a shadow in our past, someone I'd long since stopped thinking about. What do you mean? I asked, my heart pounding. Mom hesitated, her eyes filling with tears. I've been keeping a secret, something I should have told you years ago. Your father didn't just leave us, Emily. I made him leave. I sat there, stunned, as she explained everything. My father hadn't abandoned us out of the blue. Mom had kicked him out after discovering his affair with a woman he'd met through work. She'd kept the truth from me to protect me, hoping to shield me from the pain of knowing that my dad had betrayed us. But in doing so, she'd also kept me in the dark about the complexities of their relationship, and the sacrifices she'd made to keep our lives intact. Mom went on to tell me about the years of struggle after my dad left, how she'd worked double shifts, taken on debt, and made countless sacrifices to make sure I never went without. She talked about the guilt she'd carried, feeling like she'd failed as a mother and a wife, and how those feelings had shaped the way she'd parented me. She wasn't just overprotective, she was terrified that I'd be hurt the way she had been. Hearing her side of the story was like piecing together a puzzle I hadn't even known was incomplete. It didn't excuse the fights or the hurtful things we'd said to each other, but it gave me a new perspective on my mom. She wasn't just my overbearing parent, she was a woman who'd been through hell and back, doing her best with what she had. Mom then revealed another layer of her story that I had never known. She admitted that she had been battling depression for years, something she had hidden behind her strong facade. She told me how she'd often cry in the shower or stay up all night worrying about bills, about my future, about everything. But she'd never let me see it because she didn't want to burden me. I sat there, stunned, as she described the pressure she'd felt to be perfect, to hold everything together, even when she was falling apart inside. I felt a rush of guilt for all the times I'd accused her of being too controlling, too overbearing, without realizing how much she was struggling. She wasn't just trying to keep me safe, she was trying to keep herself afloat. We sat in that cafe for hours, talking about everything, our past, our mistakes, and the things we'd never said out loud. By the time we left, I felt a sense of relief, like a weight I'd been carrying for years had finally been lifted. Mom and I weren't perfect, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like we understood each other. After that conversation, things didn't magically get better overnight, but it was a start. Mom and I made a conscious effort to rebuild our relationship, one small step at a time. We started by meeting for lunch once a week, keeping the conversations light and avoiding any topics that might trigger old arguments. It was awkward at first, but gradually, we began to reconnect. I learned to see my mom as more than just my mother. I started to see her as a person, with her own flaws, fears, and dreams. She told me stories about her life before I was born, things I'd never known because she'd always been so focused on being my mom. I found out she'd once dreamed of being a travel nurse, working in different countries and experiencing new cultures. But when she got pregnant with me, those dreams took a back seat. Mom also started to open up about her struggles after the divorce, admitting that she'd felt overwhelmed and alone. She'd never remarried, partly because she was too busy raising me, but also because she'd never fully healed from what my father had done. She'd thrown everything she had into being my mom, and when I began to pull away, it felt like losing the only thing she'd ever fought so hard to protect. I told her about my own struggles, too, about how lost I'd felt during our time apart, and how I'd been too proud to reach out. I admitted that I'd blamed her for things that weren't entirely her fault, and that I'd been unfair in the way I'd handled our fights. It wasn't easy to confront my own mistakes, but it felt good to finally be honest. One day, while we were having coffee at a park, Mom brought up an idea that took me by surprise. Emily, I've been thinking. I want to take that trip I always talked about. The one where I go to Europe and see all the places I've dreamed of. And I'd love it if you came with me. At first, I was hesitant. Traveling together sounded great in theory, but I worried that spending so much time together might reopen old wounds. But Mom seemed genuinely excited, and I realized that this trip wasn't just about seeing new places, it was about reconnecting and creating new memories to replace the painful ones. We spent months planning our trip, poring over travel guides and making lists of all the places we wanted to visit. We settled on a 2-week trip to Italy and France, filled with art, history, and plenty of time to just enjoy each other's company. It was the first time in years that I'd seen Mom so genuinely happy, and it reminded me of the bond we'd once had. The trip was everything we needed and more. We spent our days exploring cobblestone streets, eating at quaint little cafes, and taking in all the sights we'd only ever seen in books. Mom's eyes lit up at every new experience, and I couldn't help but feel grateful that we'd finally found our way back to each other. We had our moments of tension, sure, but every time we felt the old arguments bubbling up, we took a step back and reminded ourselves of how far we'd come. One night, as we sat on a balcony overlooking the Florence skyline, Mom turned to me, her eyes filled with emotion. "Emily, I'm so proud of you. I know I don't say it enough, but I am. You're strong, independent, and you're living the life I always wanted for you." I felt tears welling up in my eyes. "I'm proud of you too, Mom. For everything. And I'm sorry for all the times I didn't see how much you were doing for me." We hugged, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were truly okay. Update number 1, finding new beginnings and moving forward. When we returned from our trip, Mom and I were closer than ever. We still had our ups and downs, but the anger and resentment that had once defined our relationship were gone. We'd learned to communicate better, to listen instead of just reacting, and to give each other the space we needed. Mom even started dating again, a man named Tom, a kind, soft-spoken retiree who shared her love of travel and had a calming presence that balanced her out. I was happy for her. She deserved to find companionship after all she'd been through. And this time, she wasn't just dating for the sake of it, she was doing it on her terms, with no pressure to be anything other than herself. Tom quickly became a regular part of our lives. He treated my mom with a kindness that she hadn't known in years, and he respected the bond we were rebuilding. They'd often invite me over for dinner, and we'd sit on Mom's back porch, laughing and sharing stories. It was the kind of peace I never thought we'd have again, and I was grateful for every moment of it. Mom also began volunteering at a local community center, helping other single mothers who were going through difficult times. She found a sense of purpose in giving back, using her own experiences to support others. Watching her thrive in this new chapter of her life was inspiring. She was finally finding the happiness that she had put on hold for so long. As for me, I felt more grounded than I had in years. I moved up in my career, started pursuing some hobbies I'd neglected, and began to truly embrace my independence without feeling guilty about it. I still checked in with Mom regularly, but it was different now. Our conversations were filled with mutual respect and understanding, not the tension that used to hang over us like a cloud. One day, I received a package in the mail from Mom. Inside was an old photo album filled with pictures of us from when I was a kid. There were photos of us at the beach, at the zoo, and on all those little adventures she'd taken me on. Tucked inside the cover was a note that read, "Emily, these are some of my favorite memories. I know we've had our rough patches, but I wouldn't trade any of it for the world. I'm so grateful that we found our way back to each other. Love, Mom." I sat there, flipping through the album, tears streaming down my face. It was a reminder of how far we'd come and how much we'd grown. Our relationship wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was enough. Final update: healing, forgiveness, and looking ahead. Hey Reddit, it's Emily again. It's been a few years since my mom and I reconnected, and I wanted to share an update. Our relationship isn't perfect, it never will be, but we've both learned to forgive each other and to move forward without holding on to the past. Mom and Tom are still together, traveling whenever they get the chance, and enjoying the life she'd once put on hold. They've been to Greece, Spain, and even took a road trip across the US to see all the national parks she'd dreamed of visiting. I've never seen her so happy, and it's a joy to watch her finally live for herself. I've continued to grow in my own career, and I've started mentoring young women who are trying to navigate the challenges of balancing independence with family. It's my way of giving back, and of honoring the lessons I've learned from my own journey. The biggest thing I've learned through all of this is that forgiveness isn't just about saying sorry, it's about understanding where the other person is coming from and allowing yourself to heal. My mom and I aren't just mother and daughter anymore, we're friends, and that's something I'll always be grateful for. To anyone out there who's struggling with a difficult relationship, whether it's with a parent, a sibling, or a friend, just know that it's never too late to start over. It won't be easy, and it might take a long time, but the effort is worth it. Sometimes, the people we love the most are the ones we hurt the deepest, but it's also those relationships that can bring us the greatest healing. Thanks for reading, and here's to new beginnings, second chances, and finding our way back to the people who matter most.